Welcome back to my YouTube channel. Hope you're doing well. If you've ever wondered what's inside commercially made dog food, what the chemicals are that are being used, and whether it's actually a good food to feed your dog, this is definitely a video that you don't want to miss. Hi everybody, it's Claude Bertoni from Canine IQ Dog Obedience and Behaviour Modification. If you're a regular visitor to the YouTube channel, I really appreciate your support, so big thanks. If you're new to the channel and you like the information, hit the subscribe button, but more importantly, hit the bell notification. That way you stay in touch with all my recent posts. The video today is all about dog diets. So I've been getting a lot of questions through emails and phone conversations with a lot of clients, and in fact, when I do behavioural consults, diet is often one of the most important things that we talk about. So it's one of the things that's the least understood going forward, and the one that contributes significantly to canine behavior. So over the course of the next 3 videos, I'll be putting together a lot of information on the most common types of diets that people are facing or producing for their dogs, pros and cons of all of them, so that effectively people can get a better understanding of what it is that they need to feed their dogs and make educated decisions. Now, before we go forward, I don't take any affiliate links or sponsorships or endorsement for any dog training related products, in particular food, so the information that I'll be giving you is definitely impartial. Today we'll be talking about dry food, and that's commercially made processed dry food. The reason why I want to start with this one is this is the most common food that's used by most people across society, and I think it's important that people need to understand that there's great varying degrees of quality and content in terms of ingredients. So the whole point of today is to break down a few of the myths and misconceptions about commercially made dry food, so that hopefully you can actually understand, firstly, what goes into it, and 2, whether it's actually the right food for you to feed your dog, and then you can make an educated decision going forward. The next one that I want to talk about is Barf, biologically accurate raw food. And the last one that I want to talk about in the very, very last video is all about a completely homemade natural diet. So we'll be talking about the food spectrum right across the board. So let's start our dry food discovery journey by talking about dry food little known facts, just to get a bit of an understanding about the background that we're dealing with. So firstly, the pet food industry is worth over $91 billion worldwide, and that's based on 2018 figures, and it's anticipated to reach in the order of $125 billion by 2025. Now, it's important to know this because we need to get an understanding of the scale of the industry that we're dealing with, and to get a bit about the background about the whole industry as a whole. And 60%, roughly 60% of the revenue that's generated from pet food revolves around the processed dry food industry. So it's quite a significantly large player within the greater pet food industry, and as such has a lot of sway over how the industry progresses and how much money gets made. So convenience is typically the driving factor with regards to processed dry food, with limited information available to the general public on chemicals and the core ingredients. Now, I don't know about you, but if I'm buying anything for me, I want to make sure that I know as much as possible, because you never know fully what chemicals and core ingredients are in my food. And with my dog, I think I have a duty of care to make sure that the best possible ingredients with the least amount of chemicals are going into food that somebody else is manufacturing or making on my behalf to give to my dog. I value my pet's health, and I need to know what I'm actually feeding the dog. The sad part about anything to do with the dry food industry is that there's minimal to no regulation, and that means that quality control and disclosure on the manufacturing process is very limited. But more importantly, it's left up to the discretion of the company manufacturing the food. Now, that's all well and good where you've got a company that's got good ethics in mind, and they've got good shareholders, and at the end of the day, they want to produce a good product and make sure that they're making money out of it. But that's not necessarily the case, because a lot of manufacturers out there, the bottom line is the driving factor, and in order to make money, the bottom line may potentially target quality as a result. Okay, so not all dry food companies have the same standards in manufacturing, and pet health suffers as a result. So effectively, if they have to subscribe to profits and achieving certain targets to make shareholders happy, and like any industry, cutting corners is important to make sure that you generate profit, but what we don't want to be doing is that pet health suffers as a result. Now, cost of the food is not an indicator of quality. So those of you that have gone to your local pet shop, you see food from
$10 a bag right the way through to $150 a bag. And just because it's expensive doesn't mean that it's good. It just means that it's more expensive. So regardless of how much money we're spending on dry food, we need to make sure that the base ingredients and the chemicals that are getting used are appropriate and safe for our pets. If they're not, it doesn't matter how much money we're paying for it. We are simply giving them food that's not good and potentially can be detrimental. Okay. Now this is where we start to get a little bit uncomfortable in the presentation. We need to start to talk about chemicals. So undisclosed chemicals that are actually in dry food, to me, are quite a problem, because if I don't know what chemicals are in there, and some of the chemicals aren't necessarily good for the health of my dog, I'd like to know up front, because the follow-on impacts may be significant and it could be detrimental to my dog's health. Okay, so the first thing that we need to look at is the carcinogenic chemicals used. The first one is BHA, too hard to pronounce. Second one is BHT. These are the acronyms or the abbreviations for them. And the third one is Ethoxyquin. Now, all of these three foods were used in the human food chain up until about 40 years ago. They were all used as preservatives in the human food chain. They were all made by Monsanto Chemicals. So on a toxicity rating of 1 to 5, these are all rate 3, 3.5. So they're highly toxic, highly carcinogenic chemicals. Ethoxyquin is no longer used in the human food chain. BHA and BHT selectively are, but they are still used in the manufacturing of cosmetics, in particular lipstick. So those of you ladies out there that are wanting to make sure that all your cosmetics are effectively safe, you may want to look into the chemical structure, because if it has BHA and BHT, they are not good chemicals and they have significant impact on cancer going forward. The problem is with BHA, BHT and Ethoxyquin, if the food that you're feeding your dog doesn't actually state what it's using as a preservative, highly likely it'll be using BHA, BHT or Ethoxyquin. They are not required to disclose these chemicals by law, but they are in most dry dog food, and to me that's quite a startling thing. The next one, and I don't know why, but propylene glycol, commonly known as antifreeze. Now, my understanding was antifreeze went in cars to stop the cars from freezing over. I never thought that it would actually get into dog food. And the reason why it's in dog food, it's a flavor enhancer. Pretty much like MSG is for humans in human food, propylene glycol is used as a softener and as a flavor enhancer for dog food. Terrible. This kills dogs, but they don't tell you, and it's not regulated. Okay. The other one that's important to understand is food dyes. Blue 2, red 40, yellow 5, and yellow 6. All highly cancerous food dyes, and they're all quite prevalent and highly used in dog food. I don't know if you're noticing, but there seems to be a common trend here that there's a lot of chemicals that are used that are not necessarily disclosed. They don't have to disclose them. And it's up to the people that are manufacturing the dry food whether they actually want to use that or not in your dog food. I would love to know whether these chemicals are actually in what I'm feeding my dog, because I don't want to give my dog any diseases. Okay, so the follow-on impact of this is associated health conditions. And obviously, the first thing that we need to worry about is cancer. Most dogs that get cancer in the course of their life can be traced back to some kind of chemicals that they've actually received in the context of eating food. Now, I'm not saying that all dry food gives dog cancers. Far from it. I'm saying that there's a proportion of dry food out there that actually has inappropriate chemicals that can potentially lead to cancer in your dogs. That's a risk that I personally think is not necessary to be had in terms of just feeding your dog sustenance. We want to make sure that our dogs eat a healthy diet. We want to make sure that the diet that we're giving them doesn't kill them. Next thing is liver disease. So if a lot of these ingredients that we mentioned before, chemicals that we mentioned before, don't give your dog cancer, they can potentially, as a byproduct, produce liver disease. I'm not comfortable with that either. Like the same way that when I eat food, I want to make sure that I stay healthy out of it, so does my dog. My dog is trusting me to give it the best food possible, not to kill it slowly. Third thing that we need to look at is an ailment called megaesophagus. Now, a lot of dogs will suffer megaesophagus in the course of their daily life, regardless of what they eat, and that effectively means that they can't swallow, so the dogs have to be gravity fed. So if you do a Google search, you'll see that there's little high chairs that are made for dogs where we're sitting in them to actually have their dogs vertical while they eat to help them swallow. However, one of the dry foods on the market has been linked to the promotion or the exacerbation of megaesophagus, and that's advanced dog food. It's probably one of the few on the market that actually has come and put their hand up and said, yep, we need to do something about it. So they're looking at ways to actually minimize the impact. But even then, this is a really expensive, high value, quality dry food, yet it's actually contributing to megaesophagus in dogs. So another contributor to the story that it doesn't matter how expensive the product is, some dry foods can produce downstream problems with your dog. And one of the things that we've noticed over the course of the last 20 years that the dogs' lives are genuinely reducing a little bit simply because of more and more dry food that's getting manufactured, and the dog's life expectancy is reducing itself. When I was growing up, very few people fed their dogs dry food. In fact, most of the dogs survived on table scraps, and a lot of dogs lived to about 19 or 20 years of age. Now, it could have been a coincidence, but the lifespan of dogs is decreasing over time. So now that we've talked about the nasty chemicals, we need to have a bit of a chat about core ingredients. And just like any food that we buy for humans, the core ingredients are pretty important. You need to know what's in there and whether they're actually good quality or poor quality. So if we look at these three examples of chicken, the one on the left looks like quite a healthy chicken, which is classified as pet food. The middle one looks a little bit suspect, but it's still pet food chicken. And the one on the right looks pretty rotten and degraded and not really tolerable or edible. However, that's also classified as pet food chicken. So the problem with allocating pet food is that there's no regulation in terms of what we can use, how we can use it, and what quantities we can use it. So not all dry food companies have the same standards in manufacturing, and pet health suffers as a result. Just like all of them don't disclose what chemicals they've got in them, a lot of them will not disclose what food that they're actually using or base ingredients to prepare your food for your dog. And that's a bit of a problem. If we're using human grade, that's one thing. If we're using animal grade or pet food grade, that's another thing. And if we're using waste or byproduct, that's another thing altogether. So I'd like to know what of the three is that we're actually feeding our dogs. So very few actually use pure protein. So if you have a look at the first three ingredients on the package of dry food that you're using, the first one has to state what protein they're using. So if they're saying chicken, you know that they're using 100% chicken protein. If they're saying that they use chicken meal, then that's effectively a compressed or manufactured version of the protein itself, which is usually a byproduct of the rendering. So it gets boiled and boiled and boiled, but it's starting off with protein and ends up being a meal process. And the last one that you need to be worried about, if it says animal protein, that could be anything. So most use meal as the main protein, like I just said, and that's fine as long as the meal is of relatively high quality. So good meal is made of a protein and it's condensed pretty much like you're making a broth. It gets, the more you cook it, it gets more concentrated and it becomes stronger in flavor. So if we start off with the raw protein that we know that is safe, then the meal that's associated with it is relatively acceptable. What we don't want is what's called animal meal, where the designation of the protein is very generic. Animal meal could effectively be anything that they particularly want to use. So it could be chickens, could be discarded animals, it could be anything. And I'll be putting some links in the description to give you an indication of what a lot of companies are using as animal meal, but it effectively is the lowest quality meal possible. And the problem with dry food is we actually don't know what meals are actually used if they're using meal as opposed to pure protein. So there's a lot of things that we need to dissect and get to the bottom of. Most overuse fillers to bulk out the food to reduce costs. Now, even the most expensive ones will potentially use fillers. I know some of the more prestige ones will use peas as a filler protein. Now, the thing with fillers, high quality ones, fillers don't tend to be detrimental to the overall well-being of your dog, but cheaper fillers potentially might, and that's where there's corn-based products which contribute to dog diabetes, which is not a very, very good thing. So when we're selecting dry food, we need to make sure that we understand what fillers are actually getting used to make sure that it's all safe and it's not going to make our dog sick as a byproduct. Fillers tend to amplify volumetric expansion of dry food when it gets wet, and as a byproduct of this, it causes bloating. So with your dry food, do yourself a test. Get yourself a glass, put a third of the glass of dry food, and then fill half the glass with water, and then just let it go. Come back after about an hour and see how much that dry food expands. That's what's called volumetric expansion. Good dry foods with good fillers will expand a very little and not a lot. Dry food that actually has a lot of fillers or a lot of padding will expand to probably 2 or 3 times the size of the volume. Believe it or not, that actually happens in your dog's stomach. So if you can imagine the food goes in there, all the stomach content is wet, it's moist, it dehydrates your dog. The food swells, the dog might drink some water after eating, so all of a sudden the food doubles or trebles in size, and the dog runs around, gets a twisted stomach, effectively bloat, and it can die within about an hour. Bloat is a terrible thing, and it can be exacerbated by dry food, which has actually got a significant amount of fillers in it. Okay, so this is just a little bit of a sheet that I've put in there that talks about the symptoms of bloat in pets. We're not going to go through all of this now, but you can have a look at this slide at your own convenience. But very, very important to understand that dry food can potentially be a complementary product or byproduct of actually giving your dogs bloat, depending on the quality of fillers that are used and how much water you actually give your dog after eating. A lot of people that are pretty strict about feeding their dog dry food, one of the things that I say to them, at least if you're feeding your dog dry food, do not let it drink for a good hour after it's fed. That way you're going to be minimizing the amount of water that comes into the dog's stomach to expand things, or more importantly, actually isolate your dog from having exercise for a good couple of hours after food. Especially deep barrel dogs like poodles, shepherds, Great Danes, where they're effectively got big chest cavities and tight little waists. Those are dogs that are candidates effectively for bloat. Okay. So what is it that we need to avoid? So now we've talked about what's included in there. So when you go to your pet shop and you want to buy something to do with dry food, what is it that we're looking at? So the first thing that we need to ask is, when selecting dry food, try and avoid these things. BHA and BHT, very, very important. If they're on the label or if they tell you that they're using them, ignore the dry food. Definitely Ethoxyquin. If that's anywhere in the ingredients, avoid it like the plague. Propylene glycol and antifreeze, we definitely don't want to be feeding that to our dogs. Any of the foods that you're buying that actually has meat byproducts classified as meal, but it doesn't tell you the specific nature of the protein, i.e. chicken, beef, pork, lamb, it needs to tell you the raw ingredient. And food dyes, if it lists any of these food dyes at all, avoid it like the plague, because it's not a good quality product. Okay, so we talked a bit about the doom and gloom as to what to avoid and what not to buy. We also now need to know what to use and what to buy, because some people want or prefer to use dry food simply because it's convenient. So let's make sure we get the best quality possible. So when selecting dry food, it's important that we try and find dry food that has some of these. First thing is human grade ingredients. Now this is incredibly rare, because the more expensive the base ingredients are, the more expensive the end product's going to be. So you'll be hard pressed to find in at least processed dry food that they've got human grade ingredients to begin with. Now in some of the videos later on, we'll talk about how human grade ingredients are easy to get, but potentially for dry food, not that simple. At least make sure that the food that you're purchasing preferably has no preservatives, which basically means it will have a relatively short shelf life. So when you buy it from when you finish it, it has to happen relatively quickly. So this would be the ideal scenario. If it does use preservatives, please make sure that it has natural preservatives. A lot of the really good dry food will use vitamin C and vitamin E as preservatives. That way you know that they don't use BHA, BHT or Ethoxyquin. Very, very important. These are all naturally occurring preservatives, and they will not harm your dog. Third thing, or the fourth thing is it's important, is to make sure that if they're using meal as opposed to pure protein as the main ingredient, that meal is made with protein and not with animal byproducts. So if it says chicken meal, lamb meal, beef meal, pork meal, whatever, you know that they're actually using the raw ingredient itself and not just anything that they found laying around on the slaughter room floor. Very important for your dog. And where possible, natural ingredients and natural additives and colorings. Avoid anything that's got processed food in there, and definitely food dyes. So I hope this was satisfactory to you guys, to give you some kind of an indication. My preference is definitely not to go down the dry food path for all of the reasons that I can't control what's actually going into my dog's diet. But if I do want to go down the dry food path, I want to make sure that the food in it is the best quality that I can possibly be feeding my dog. and if it's not, I simply won't get it. Any questions, any comments, folks, by all means leave me a comment and I'll definitely respond to it. If you've had some bad associations with dry food and you want to talk about it, happy to hear from you. And if you've had some amazing experiences with dry food and you think everything I've said is a load of rubbish, definitely I want to hear about it as well. This, like I said, this is the first of 3 videos. The next 2 will be talking about Barf and we'll be talking about raw diets. Thanks again, guys. Have a great day.